Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the course of English for Academic Communication with me, Maria Dewi Rosari from Jakarta International University. Welcome to week 7. We are now in lecture 7, and we have a new topic, which is departmental presentation. Well, actually, this topic is for lecture 7 and 8, but I divided it into 2 because in each meeting, we will discuss different topics about it. For this lecture 7, it will deal with the language mechanics and challenges. So in the case or in the setting of departmental presentation, what kind of language mechanics we need to master? And then what can probably be the challenges for us when we are having a departmental presentation? Meanwhile, in lecture 8 later, after this, the lecture will deal about the application activities and some more tips about succeeding departmental presentation. Well, before we start the lecture, let's find out what's going to be the learning objective of lecture 7. As you can see on the right side of your slide, in slide 2, there are 4 main topics that we are going to cover in lecture 7. The first one is unit introduction. I will introduce you first about what this lecture is going to be. So you know what to do, what you are expected to do, and what you are going to learn. And then number 2 is about the mechanics of language. As you can see there are 11 subsections, each of which covers different type of expression that we need to know and understand when participating in departmental presentation. And then moving on to lecture 3, we're going to see the basics of effective language use. And this is also an important part because we need that to support the application of the mechanics of language that we learn in section 2. And last but not least, it's about handling challenges during presentation. So what can probably be the challenges in the presentation and how to overcome that? All right, so that's all that we are going to learn in this lecture 7. Okay, I hope that you can follow every activity that I provide you in this lecture 7, both for self-study and for classroom instruction. So if you are using this material as an instructor, there will be a different procedure in applying the material, but it doesn't mean that this material can only be applied for classroom instruction. Even if you are using this material for your self-study, it's still applicable too. I will provide the different procedures in the next lecture. Okay, without further ado, let's start this lecture 7. Before we enter section 1 about unit introduction, let's do some ice breaking first. So I have one question for you to answer. And this question, yeah, you did it before, right? In the previous lectures. So I want you to reflect on yourself. I want you to see your experience you have had so far related to giving departmental presentation or simply any presentations. It's not necessary a presentation in a very big forum. No. Even a presentation that you have done in your class and during your courses in the university, that also that can be used to answer this question. So the question is, what are common challenges you usually face when delivering a presentation? Okay, so you can address this question from many angles, meaning that the challenges can be seen from many perspectives. It can be about the expressions when you need to use in a presentation, or it's about handling the audience or handling the questions in Q&A session, or it's about the preparation. So many things. There are many angles to address this question. and you may choose it. I provide with 5 blanks there that you need to fill in, and you can answer, each of them from different perspective. For example, first answer will be the challenge about the use of appropriate expression. And then the second one about being confident in front of a lot of people. And then number 3 can be about, for example, how to prepare a presentation. And then number 4, for example, your challenge in handling questions, both the expected and unexpected questions from your audience. And then the last one will be something else. All right, so pause this video and stay on slide 3 to give you enough time to answer this question. And I hope that you can finish this question before we really enter the material of lecture 7. Okay, I want you to reflect first on what you have experienced so far. But whenever you're finished and you're ready, let's move on to the next slide, which is about section 1, unit introduction. Let's see what this lecture 7 will be about. Managing questions and answers that require engagement in impromptu dialogues is the task that presents the most challenges to students. Yeah, impromptu dialogues, impromptu talks can be something challenging and threatening for some students because we never know what will happen, what will be talked about, what will be discussed, what will be questioned, right? So we never know what's coming, and that's why it presents the most challenges to students, especially if the students are not that familiar with such a communication setting. Even the most well-prepared students often suddenly and notably change their body language, confidence, and delivery in ways that undermine their authority during the very crucial final moments of a presentation. So this challenge is not only for those who are, underprepared. Even the ones who are well prepared can still face this challenge. For example, you deliver a presentation first, right? And you rehearsed it so many times, and the material really sticks in your mind, and delivering the material is very easy for you because you have, rehearsed it again and again and again. But when it comes to Q&A, you can rehearse nothing, right? You don't know what kind of questions, what type of question will be addressed to you. And in the change of that section from presentation to Q&A, that can, change the way we, present our body language, the way we show our confidence, also in the way we deliver, our performance. So that's why I created this lecture that focuses mainly on developing the ability to manage questions and answers in departmental presentations that involve common activities, such as making class presentations and defending proposals or theses. So the material for today is not only for just presentation in a department like that. Well, you can apply it in many type of settings. You can use it for your class presentations when your lecturers assign you to present a material, or even you can use it for later when you are defending your proposal, your thesis proposals, right? Because in those kind of settings, you need the skills, you need the mechanics of the language, and you need the strategies that this lecture 7 and 8 are going to cover. Even when later you are already in a professional work and you are assigned to a certain department and you need to report or present something, a project or maybe a progress that you have made so far in front of a forum, you can also use this material too. So this material is really applicable to many situations. In these situations, questions are usually more predictable because you are often dealing with an audience known to you in a somewhat controlled situation. Yeah. So usually in a presentation, we have a material delivery and after that Q&A, right? So the ones that is unpredictable is the Q&A session or question and answer session, right? But when it comes to, class presentation or defending proposal in front of your lecturers, they are still, more predictable. Although sometimes you cannot really, precisely identify what kind of questions that will be addressed to you, but you know your audience, right? The audience is your classmates. The audience is your lecturer. So the audience is known to you. But when it comes to, delivering a presentation in front of strangers, that's gonna be daunting. That's gonna be more challenging, right? The content in this unit, lectures 7 and 8, is designed to help you build the confidence and skills needed to field an audience's questions before moving on to dealing with an audience that may be unknown to you and in a more unpredictable situation, such as conference presentations or job talks. The unit provides specific guidelines about how to deal more confidently with questions that you may encounter at your next speaking event. All right, so that's what this lecture 7 especially will be about, and a bit about what lecture 8 will be about, because lecture 8 will be the application of today's material. Next question for you. Still a reflection, self-reflection question. I want you to answer this question. What do you think are the skills needed to deal more confidently with questions in a presentation? Well, you can answer this, you can answer this by imagining yourself giving a presentation in front of your classmates, or maybe in a forum whose audience is unknown to you. So up to you. So what are the skills needed so that we can handle questions well and more confidently? Pause this video. Do not click the next step or continue this video. I want you to finish answering this question first. But whenever you're ready, continue the video and also click the next content. There are some techniques of language we need to master in dealing more confidently with questions in a presentation, of course. So they are, first, to welcome our audience. We open it, welcoming the audience is very important. So we acknowledge them, acknowledge their presence. And then warm up an audience. It's just like when doing sport, right? When we are doing sport, we need to do warm up. It is not recommended to go straight to the main menu of the sport. We can get injured. And in this case, when we are able to warm up the audience, it will be more comfortable, and we can build engagement with our audience before we really start the presentation. And then introduce the subject or topic of our presentation. To explain the division of material, because in a presentation, there are usually a lot of parts or sections like that. And then to give instruction about asking and answering questions. How do you give instruction or like rules about asking and answering questions in your presentation session? To provide a note of finality. So when you are about to end your presentation, and thank your audience, how to do that. And then to invite questions for the Q&A session. To signal transitions between sections. So how to do that, what to say when you want to move from section 1 to the next section of your presentation. And then to use rhetorical questions as transitional device. And last one is to emphasize points. Well, although we may think that the content of our presentation is, all are important, but some points of our presentation need to be highlighted or emphasized, right? And how to do that. So that's what we are going to learn in the next section, which is section 2. Section 2 will be about mastering the mechanics of language. There are 11 types of expressions that we need to master for this departmental presentations. Let's start. Let's start from to welcome our audience. But before I reveal the expression that we can use to welcome our audience, let me ask you one question. How do you usually welcome your presentation audience? What do you say? It can be what do you say, or how do you do that, or maybe do you use body gesture or something else? You work with your facial expressions or what? So how do you usually welcome your presentation audience? Just saying, or just smiling, or with a hand movement or other things? Just write down at least 5 by looking back at your experience in giving presentation. When you finish with that question, so I will reveal to you the expressions that we can use to welcome our audience. So the useful phrases are, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It depends on the time when you have your presentation, right? In addition to greeting, you can also say welcome. Good morning and welcome to my presentation on, then tell the topic or tell the title of your presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone today? Okay, I'll repeat the phrases and please repeat after me. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good. Good morning and welcome to my presentation on. Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone today? Good job. And don't forget, when you greet them, when you welcome them, please provide smile. So you really mean it, to show that you really mean your greeting, your welcome, you really mean it. So I provided you with 4 phrases to welcome your audience. Now, please add your own expressions. Add your own expressions. What are other phrases or expressions that we can use to welcome our audience in a presentation? List down at least 3. If you have finished, let's move on to the next one. After welcoming the audience, we need to warm up an audience. How do you usually warm up your audience? What do you say? What do you do? And how to do that, right? Write it down there. Warm up is like breaking up, not breaking up, ice breaking. That's what I meant to say. So when you enter a room for your presentations, everyone is silent, right? Everyone is silent. Everyone is getting ready to listen to your presentation. But usually there is, silence. Everybody is staring at you like that, especially if the audience hasn't met you before. So there is this ice that needs to be broken the ice. So how do you do that? How do you warm up the situation, the atmosphere, so that, it's more enjoyable, both for you and your audience? If you haven't had, or haven't done anything for the warming up the audience or ice breaking, what do you think can be done for warming up an audience, or to do a bit of ice breaking in the beginning of your presentation? Write it down on the left side of slide 8. When you're done, let me reveal to you useful phrases that we can use to warming up our audience. We can conduct a poll by saying, repeat after me after this. How many of you have ever? Good. So in this technology era, we can conduct a poll using so many applications or websites. We can do it online when everyone works with their phone, like Mentimeter, um, and many others. So we can conduct a poll, like we ask a simple question, but it's still related to the topic of our presentation. So this kind of question or this kind of poll is not only for warming up, but it's kind of focusing our audience focus to the topic of our presentations. So in the beginning of our presentation, our audience still thinking about so many things, maybe about their family, about their work, about their school, about many things. So we direct their focus to the topic of our presentations by asking a very simple question related to our topic. We can conduct a poll by just asking the audience to raise their hand, or we can ask them to work on their phone, to open a certain app, and then you can show the result of the poll. So many things to do about the poll. Next phrase. I'll begin by playing a game. It can be done too. So when you play a game before the presentation, we can create like an atmosphere that is not so tense. Although the presentation should be taken seriously, but we can still make the atmosphere not tense though, right? When people are not tense, they become more enjoyable, and they can join the presentations well and more happily, not like tense and really serious. Next one, I'd like to start by, and next one is, I want you to add your own expression. What else can we do? What other expressions can we say when we want to warm up an audience? Please fill in the blanks. Moving on to introduce the subject or topic. After we, greet and welcome our audience, and then we warm up our audience, now we need to introduce the subject or topic of our presentation. How do you usually do that? Please write down your ideas based on your experience on the left side of slide 9. All right, now let's see the useful phrases that we can use to introduce our subject of presentation. Repeat after me. I'm pleased to be here today to talk to you about. Good. Today, I'm going to talk about my research on. Okay. The purpose of my presentation is. Yes. The topic of my presentation is. Yes. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you my research on. Good. So those are the 5 useful phrases that we can use to introduce the topic or subject of our presentation. Now, can you add more? Please take 1 minute to complete that. Whenever you're finished, let's move on to the next one. Now we need to explain the division of material of our presentation. How do you usually do that? How do you explain to your audience that, there will be a lot of divisions in your presentation material? And what do you say? What do you usually say? What do you usually do? Let's write it down on the left side of slide 10. Okay, now I will reveal to you the useful phrases that we can use to explain the division of material of our presentation. Repeat after me. time does not allow me to cover all aspects of my research in 20 minutes. So I intend to focus on, yes. In today's talk, I plan to examine or cover the following 3 issues. 1, 2, and 3. Good. So 1, you say the first material division, 2, the second material division, and 3rd, the next material division. If you have more than 3, so you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. The next one. I hope to provide answers to 3 questions that people often ask about. Those questions are as follows. All right, now it's your time to add your own expression. Can you construct your own expressions with your own wordings, with your own diction about how to explain the division of material in your presentation? Take 1 minute to complete that. All right, let's move on. Now, the next stage is to give instruction about asking and answering questions. So it's a common, a common practice that we have Q&A session after we deliver a presentation material, right? But how will you manage that? Will you allow your audience to ask questions whenever you are in your presentation stage, or you want your audience to keep that until the end of your presentation? And how will you, provide the instruction and explanation about how to, ask and answer questions? So how do you usually explain the rule of Q&A in your presentation? What do you say? Or what do you do? Or do you show the rules of asking and answering questions in the very first slide of your presentation like that? Or you just explain that, or what? Write it down on the left side of slide 11. All right, now I'll reveal to you the useful phrases that we can use to give instruction about asking and answering questions. Repeat after me. Do feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions. So for this one, it's okay for you to receive any interruption for any audience, right? Let's see the next one. I'll try to answer all of your questions after the presentation. For the second phrase, you are instructing your audience to just ask you a question when the presentation is finished. So in other words, you are not, receiving any interruption during your presentation. It's different. Phrase 1 and phrase 2 are different. The next one. Please save your questions until the end of my presentation. Good. It's the same with the second phrase. All right, so now, do you have any other idea about what to say, or about another expression that we can use to give instruction about asking and answering questions? Let's write it down on the right side of slide 11. Good job. Let's move on. The next one, to provide a note of finality or giving a signal that your presentation is about to end. Before I reveal the phrases that we can use, it's your time first to reflect on what you have done so far. So how do you usually close your presentation before the Q&A session? How do you do that? What to say? What do you do? You say something, or you are not saying something, but you are using your body gestures, maybe, if that works too. Write it down on the left side of your slide 12. All right, now I'll reveal to you the useful phrases that we can use to provide a note of finality. Repeat after me. To conclude, in conclusion. All right. Now I'd like to recap. I'd like to close by showing you the conclusion of my presentation or material or my research like that. Next one. Before opening the floor to questions, let me briefly summarize what I have covered. Yes, next one. Let's summarize briefly what we have looked at. Right? Now to sum up. Good, next one. Finally, in closing, so you can choose which one, finally or in closing, and then you continue with your closing statement. Okay, now your turn. At your own expressions to provide a note of finality on the right side of your slide 12. Take 1 minute for that. All right, now let's move on to the next section. So after you provide a note of finality, don't forget to thank your audience. And how do you usually do that? What to say? To thank your audience for their time, their attention, their participation, their contribution during your presentation and Q&A session. Let's write it down on the left side of your slide 13. Okay, now I'll reveal to you the useful phrases that we can use to thank your audience. This is not the one and only way to thank our audience. There are so many ways. Repeat after me. Thank you for your courteous attention. Good. Thank you very much for your input this morning. One more. Thank you very much for your questions this afternoon. All right. How about you? Can you make your own expressions to thank your audience before you open Q&A session or before you really close the entire session of your presentation? Write it down on the right side of slide 13. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one, we will find out how to invite questions from our audience. But let me ask you first, how do you usually invite questions from your audience? What do you say? What do you do? Write it down on the left side of slide 14. So these expressions are used to, open Q&A session. So after you signal that you have finished your presentation and then now you move to the Q&A session. So how do you start the Q&A? How do you invite the questions from the audience? We're gonna just say, okay, it's Q&A session. Any questions like that? Or what do you usually say? Okay, I'll reveal to you the useful phrases. Repeat after me. Now I'll try to answer any questions that you may have. Good. So this really indicates that, okay, so Q&A now is open, right? So you are now allowed to ask me questions like that. Next one. Now I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you may have. I'll be pleased, I'll be happy to answer any questions. So when you say these expressions, show that you really mean it. Show that we really mean to welcome the questions from our audience. Provide a smile too. Don't forget your facial expression, your body gesture. Show that you really welcome them to ask questions. The next one, the simplest one. Are there any questions? Good. So now for you, add your own expressions. Can you make your own expressions in inviting questions from your audience? You can add the expressions that you usually use, that you usually say when inviting questions. Whenever you're finished, let's move on to the next slide. The next one is the signal transitions between sections. It's very common to have a lot of sections in one presentation section, and we need to provide bridging, right? We need to provide signals to tell the audience that we're about to move to a new section, so they won't be confused. And how do you usually do that? How do you usually bridge between sections in your presentation? What do you usually say? Write it down on the left side of slide 15. When you're finished, please click next to find out the useful phrases that we can use to signal transitions between sections. Repeat after me. Next, let's move on to, yes, turning now to, and you say the title of the next section, right? The first issue leads us to the second issue about So far, we have discussed this section. Next, I want to focus on next section. Okay, so in this phrase, the first blank is filled in with the topic of the previous section, while the second blank will be about the next section topic. Next one. So far, we have considered blah, blah, blah. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to, yes, this is the same case with the previous phrase. Next one. Let's go on to the next aspect of, all right. Before moving on to the next category, let me give one more example. Okay, so for this phrase, although you are not yet moving to the next section, but you are indicating that the example that you are about to explain is going to be the last part or the last explanations of the current section before moving on to the new one. Okay, so those are the useful phrases, the examples. Only the examples, not the one and only that we can use to signal transitions between sections in our presentation. How about you? Can you make your own expressions to signal transition between sections in your presentation? Please write it down on the right side of your slide 15. Whenever you're finished, let's move on to the next one, the 10 type of mechanics of language that we need to master. It's about using rhetorical questions as transitional devices. Rhetorical question is a question whose answer is actually known already. So it's not like a question whose answer is unknown by the audience, but your audience knows the answer. So that's why we call it rhetorical. Do you use rhetorical questions in your presentation? Why or why not? Maybe you think that that's not really important because all of us know the answers already. Maybe. Or yeah, sometimes we need that. We need to use rhetorical questions just, to make the situation less intense. That's also possible to use for answering this question. When you are finished answering that question, I'll reveal to you the useful phrases to address rhetorical questions as transitional devices. So it's not just using any rhetorical question without any purpose, but using this kind of questions to, to provide transitional devices. Repeat after me. Where does this leave us? And then you can provide like some pauses for your audience to provide feedback or answers to you. What can we expect from this? Good. Where do we go from here? Good. Now at your own expressions. If you have used any rhetorical questions in your presentations as transitional devices, write them down on the right side of slide 16. When you're finished, let's continue to the next part, to emphasize points. Although, like I said, we think that the content of a material of a presentation is all important, but sometimes there are several points that we need to highlight or to emphasize. How do you usually do that? How do you highlight points in a presentation? How do you emphasize point in a presentation? Write it down on the left side of slide 17. So this is going to be the last type of mechanics of language that we need to master for departmental presentation. Emphasizing points. Okay, here we go. Let's see the useful phrases that we can use to emphasize points. If you see that the phrases are not like what you wrote, that's okay. Because the phrases that I listed down here, it's not like the one and only phrases that we can use. Of course, we can use many other expressions. That's why I always ask you to write down your own expressions. Repeat after me. The main thing is, good. It's important to emphasize at this point that, good. The key point is, okay. This is the most crucial step in the process. Yes, there are only 4. Now it's time for you to add your own. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's all the 11 types of expressions in mechanics of language that we need to master and understand in delivering departmental presentation. Before we move on to next section, which is about basics of effective language use, I want you to answer this question. So from all the expressions that we have covered in the previous slides, which expressions do you usually use? Maybe there are some phrases that I showed to you are the ones that you have used many times in your presentations. So what are they? List them down. And then the next question is, which expressions are new to you? Shortly speaking, in this slide, I want you to, reflect on your experience and your own understanding, on your own mastery of mechanics of language for departmental presentation to decide. So this is the expression that I already use or already know, and this one are the new ones for me. So when you are able to, to classify all these expressions I presented to you in these 2 types, in these 2 boxes, so you know which ones that are already familiar to you and which ones that need further practice or need further application in your next speaking event. Take your time to answer these questions, right? Whenever you're finished, let's move on to the next slide, which is the section 3 about basics of effective language use. All right, now we are in section 3 about basics of effective language use. So it's not enough to know the mechanics of the language that we learned in the previous section, in section 2. We need to also understand the effective use of the language that we have known, so that the presentations that we deliver will be effective, will be efficient, and will be delivered well to our audience. Okay, let's find out the basics of effective language use. The purpose of this lecture is not to present the detailed coverage about how to craft a speech, which is the focus of many oral presentation guides. So you are not going to find like how to construct a speech from the opening and then the content and then the closing. That's not the goal of this lecture. Instead, it emphasizes the basics of language use that a speaker should keep in mind when drafting a speech or answering questions. So if you are expecting this lecture going to guide you on how to construct a speech or a presentation from the opening till closing, maybe this course is not the one that you're looking for. But if you're looking for how to, you know, the basic of language that I need to use, I need to master, I need to, you know, say in my presentation, so this is the right lecture for you. Even those who consider themselves highly competent may still want to remind themselves of the basic principle of effective language use. So we have 9 basics of effective language use that we are going to discuss one by one. Let's find out the first one, which is about accuracy. How to be accurate in using the basics principles of language use. Use words that will help your listeners to understand your meaning as precisely as possible. So when we are selecting words to explain our material, it's not supposed to be words that are, you know, sound sophisticated, sound very intelligent like that. It's not the right choice of words if that is not helping our audience to understand our material or presentation. The immediacy of speaking makes it challenging to find the exact words you want on the spot. That is why a preparation that includes anticipating and answering potential questions is critical in maximizing the accuracy of your word choice and meaning. So even though there are so many unpredictable events or issues in our presentation that we are going to have, preparation still will help us a lot, especially in selecting the right word choice so that we can deliver accurate message in our presentation. Number 2, simplicity. Avoid complex sentences and needless hedging terms. Your objective is to get the audience to understand your intended message. For some people, they may think that it's better to use what I said, sophisticated or high level of words. But that kind of word choice may make his or her audience confused and finally not understand the content of the material. So simplicity is the key. The way we can, help ourselves to select what kind of words or what kind of terms that can be used in our presentation is by looking at our audience. Who will be our audience? Will it be professors? Will it be students like us? So when we know the type of our audience, so we can select the right word choice, right? Or will it be just students from a high school? So if so, do not use any diction or expression or terminology for professors. They won't understand it, although that sounds very intelligent, let's say, but that won't be useful. Number 3, conciseness. Using words efficiently and omitting unnecessary words will help you enhance the clarity of your message. So do not make your presentation or explanation as long as possible, because that won't be necessary. Avoid talking too long to get to your point if you have a tendency to communicate in a roundabout way. Sometimes we need to be straight to the point, but sometimes we need to put a bit of elaborations, but make sure that's, in the right portion. Don't be too long, but also don't be too short. It should be concise. Number 4 is coherence. An oral presentation does not have the visible punctuation marks and written words that are in a text. That's why we need to provide logical connections among your ideas to enhance understanding and retention of your message. Use transitional devices. Use transitional signals. Use indication that we are moving from one section to another, like the methods of language that we just learned previously. Use some signals that tells the logical connection from one thing to another in our presentation. Number 5, limit jargon, abbreviations, and acronyms. Or just use them very carefully to avoid alienating listeners who may not share that language, especially if you are in a, let's say, international conference or international seminar whose participants are coming from many countries with different cultures, different mother tongue, right? Some of them may understand your abbreviations or acronyms, but some of them may not. If you think that it is important to use abbreviations or acronym, use them wisely, or spare some time to explain that so that everyone in your room can relate to your jargon, to your abbreviation, or to your acronym. Otherwise, some people may, feel disconnected from the content of your presentation. Never assume shared understandings or make your audience guess what you mean. That's what's important. Number 6, define terms. If the term has an important role in the argument and your usage of the term departs from ordinary usage, or if there's a chance that your listeners might not understand the term in the way that you intended, then you should always define the term, especially if the term is very technical or very contextual to a certain context, to a certain situation. That's very important to define the term, to make sure that everyone in the room or everyone in your audience share the same understanding, so all of them can, relate to your presentation. These definitions help reduce unwanted connotations or ambiguities. Right. Number 7, express your ideas vividly. An important element of a memorable talk is the vividness of how the message is expressed. Although we have a very good message in our presentations, but if we are not able to express the ideas vividly or obviously, that's still meaningless. So we need to consider our audience, consider the way we will express our ideas so that our ideas can be delivered well and clearly. Avoid passive voice and bookish language. Instead, use active voice, everyday language, personalized constructions, and/or colorful terms that appeal to listeners' sensibilities in order to engage them. So the importance of this point number 7, expressing ideas vividly, is that to make sure that our audience is fully engaged with us during our presentation. Next one, number 8, use bias-free language. Be aware of how certain expressions may reflect unconscious assumptions about groups that may be a part of your audience. So we need to make sure certain expressions may trigger assumptions, and sometimes the assumptions are hidden. So we need to really address a language that is clear or doesn't have a double meaning or double interpretation. Using such language undermines the argument's effectiveness. Why is it important? Because we need to make sure that our argument, our delivery of the presentation is effective, right? That's why we call it basics of effective language use. Avoid using gender biased, race and ethnicity biased, age biased, and disability biased language. That's very sensitive. Instead of creating insightful and informational presentation, we can't, we may end up offending a certain group of people in our audience. So be careful. And then number 9, organize your points strategically. We have a lot of points in our presentations. We need to organize them very clearly and strategically so that they can be delivered well and effective. Your strongest arguments should be placed at either the beginning or at the end of the message. Such placement will make greater impressions and will be more memorable. If we have a lot of points and we are not able to manage them well in our presentations, that won't be informational for our audience too. Well, previously I mentioned 9. Well, it is 10 basics of effective language use. The 10 is the longest one. Let's see the last basics of effective language use. The last one is this. Keep in mind Aristotle's 3 key elements of persuasiveness. So when we want to provide persuasive message, when we want to persuade our audience, we can use the techniques from Aristotle's key elements of persuasiveness. What are they? This is the first key element. Number 1 is logos. It is the appeal to the audience's reason, the rational proof associated with formal logic, and the citation of relevant facts and objective evidence, such as statistics, case histories, surveys, facts, examples, precedents, within the message, and the progression of the top from point to point logically. So logos is about logic. In order to be logical, we need to show the proof, the evidence, the data, right? It's not just the argument. If we keep persuading our audience, just giving argument, personal judgment again and again, they won't believe in us. They won't, they won't take it from us because we cannot provide, backup data, backup statistics that show that our argument is logical. But it's not only about the presence of facts or evidence, but the way we present our arguments in a logical way is also important. The second key element is pathos. It is the appeal to the audience's emotions. Previously is the audience's reasons, now the audience's emotions. And the last one is ethos, the degree of confidence the audience has in the speaker on the basis of his or her character, personality, and credibility. So this is why it's important to show our confidence, show that we are credible speaker, that we have a good personality, trustworthy personality, and a good character to believe in. We can show that by, having a good preparation for our presentation, have a good reading about the issue, about the topics that we are going to present, so that we have a lot of, informations that we can use to help us during the presentation, especially during the Q&A. If we have a lot of researches, we have a lot of knowledge, if we have read many books and many references, other people will, will see us as a credible person, a credible speaker, and they will have ethos, they will have confidence in us. All right, so that's the 10 points that we need to keep in mind to, to succeed the use of the mechanics of language that we learned in the previous section. So it's not only about what expression to use and how to use them, but it's also about how to, make the use of it effective in our presentation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the next one, we are moving to the last section of this lecture 7, which is about handling challenges during presentation. So this lecture is about the language mechanics and challenges, and we have covered the language mechanics as well as the basic effective language use. And the last one, let's cover the challenges. What can probably be the challenges for a departmental presentation? So there are many challenging situations that may occur in a presentation. So many, because there are so many unpredictable situations in a presentation. especially in a presentation with unknown audience, right? If it is just presentation in a classroom, we know our classmates, we know their character. We can somehow predict what kind of questions they will ask to us, right? But how about a presentation that involves, a lot of institutions that we have never met? That will be very challenging. Those challenging situations usually come in a form of questions. Yes. So first section of our presentation will be the material delivery, right? And after that will be the Q&A section. So the more challenging situation will be the Q&A, because we cannot rehearse anything, right? We can just rehearse our material, but we cannot rehearse the Q&A session, how it will run, right? Because we never know what the audience will ask us. Here are some suggested strategies and language for filling the first 7 challenging situations covered in this lecture. So this lecture will cover 7 challenging situations in a Q&A session. There are many types of questions that we need to know so that we know how to tackle them. And this type of questions include you will cover later question, an off-subject question, a stupid question, a limited interest question, a rambling or long-winded question, a multi-question question, and a don't understand or need more time to think question. Have you ever experienced some types of the question there in your Q&A session? Which one do you think is the most challenging type of question to have? Okay, we will discuss each of the question one by one. And let's start from a you will cover later questions. If it's a questions that you can answer briefly right away, do so. For example, the short answer to your question is yes, and I will be addressing your question fully when I get to the methodology section, which is coming up next. So it's okay for a question to be covered later and not on the spot or at the time when the question is asked. Be specific about when you will be addressing a listener's question if you choose to postpone answering it so that the question does not disrupt the flow of your presentation. So as a presenter, you have the right to manage the Q&A, meaning that you can give the instruction to the audience like what we discussed in section 2. We can let them interrupt us during the presentation, or we can just let them or let the audience ask us questions after the presentation is finished, right? And even though you are allowing your audience to interrupt you or ask questions during your presentation, you can still choose to cover their question later. But please be clear about when to answer that question. For example, you can say this. Thank you for raising the point about the question. I have considered that issue and I will be covering it in the discussion section of my presentation. Please ask your question again if that section does not provide clarity for you, right? So the time when the question will be covered is clear there in the discussion section. You also might like to remind the questioner when you get to that section. This is related to the question that you raised earlier, right? So you postpone it, and when you come to the right section where that covers that question, you can relate it back to the question from the questioner. Number 2, an off the subject question. We can always expect to receive such question even though we are in an academic situation, and this is how to tackle that. If it's a question that you can answer quickly, always comment on it very briefly. Just comment it very briefly. If a question is off the subject and would move the focus away from your talk, consider postponing it until the end of your presentation. And that's okay too. You have the right to do so. How to say that is like this. That's an interesting question, but it seems to be more related to blah, blah, blah. Would you mind if we discuss it after the presentation? So you make sure that the flow of your presentation will not be disrupted. Note that sometimes a seemingly irrelevant or off the subject question may not be so. It could be very well be a questioner's indirect way of getting to the heart of the question that he or she has in mind. If you are unsure about the question's relevance, check with the person who raised the question by politely asking, still politely. How does the question relate to the topic at hand? The question seems to be more related to, right? If you're not sure about the relation, the relevance, you may ask back to make sure that you understand it correctly. Number 3, a stupid question. Is that really any question that's stupid? First, there is really no stupid question. Some questions that are seemingly simple on the surface might lead to stimulating discussions about your work. Although you think that the question is too simple, it's just a simple question, it's just an easy question. The answer is very clear, but we are not allowed to show that kind of response. Still respect the questioner, respect the question, and the question that we think is stupid can be contributive to the discussion of our work. Consider each question as an opportunity for you to clarify our work or to emphasize the key points that we intend to convey to our audience members. Be tactful and never insult. Still be polite. The questioner. If it's a question that answered already, you can say, this is the same question that the previous audience raised earlier. Let me answer it again briefly. This is an important question. Let me approach or answer this issue in a different way. So use this opportunity when the stupid question comes as a way to, clarify or elaborate further the issue being discussed. Next one, a limited interest question. What does it mean? For comments that you can comment on very briefly, your priority is always to answer your audience's questions. For questions that seem obscure or of limited interest and that might take valuable time away from the focus of your presentation, then, as with the strategy recommended for dealing with an off-the-subject question previously, postpone the question and discuss it with the questioner one-on-one after your presentation. Having said that, you need to make sure that the question is indeed a limited interest question by using the following approach. Thank you for your question. The question you have raised is a complicated one that merits more time to answer fully. How many of you would like to spend some time discussing this question? And then invite them to have a further discussion with you after your presentation so that you can, save your time. You can make sure that the time given to you, which is usually limited, for accommodating other questions from your audience members. Number 5, a rambling or long-winded question. Yeah, that may happen too. Many students find this communication style very challenging to face in either a seminar discussion or a question and answer session. Many students are quick to share their experiences of feeling panic about not knowing whether one has missed the question as the questioner's monologue continues, because that's too long. So some students may find it difficult to find the main message of the long-winded talk. And at the same time, feeling too embarrassed to ask the questioner to repeat something he or she said a while earlier. So some students may think, I don't, so which one's the question? But I don't feel like I'm okay to ask or to clarify the questioner or to repeat the question again. Does this sound familiar? The key is to interrupt as soon as you find yourself getting lost in a question, and that's okay. That lacks focus on not understanding what the question means. For example, you can say this. Excuse me for interrupting. So the question you are asking is, and then you, what's that? Say how you understand the question in long-winded talk or rambling talk. Excuse me for interrupting. So what you need to know from me is, you clarify. You interrupt and then you clarify. And that's okay to interrupt in such setting, in such situation. So do not wait. Do not wait until the end of the talk, the long talk, and then you ask them to repeat. That's going to be a waste of time. Avoid waiting until the end or asking, could you repeat your questions? Don't do that. That will waste your time. That will, sacrifice the time that you can use to, answer the questions from other members. A multi-question question, a question that has another question. Another situation that intimidates many students is facing multiple questions at once, or a question that includes multiple sub-questions. So a question with sub-questions. Zero in on one point or questions at a time. For example, you've raised a lot of important issues. Let me try to respond on the matter of, if time is very limited, prompt the questioner to choose the question that he or she would like you to answer. For example, those are important issues, but I don't think we have enough time to address them all. What is the main question you would like me to answer? So that's okay to not accommodate all the questions and the sub-questions all together. So if you really know that the time is very limited, and usually the moderator also reminds the time is limited, so you can confirm to ask your questioner back about which questions that they want you to answer, to select one like that. And it's also important so that you are not only focusing on a certain audience, but you can cover as many questions from various audience members as possible. Next one. If you do not feel comfortable answering multiple questions at once, try interrupting politely as soon as the questioner starts moving on the second part of a question by saying, before you move on to the next question, may I answer your first question first? Some presenters are not that okay with receiving multiple questions at once and then answering it with all together at once like that. And it's okay to interrupt, do it when the questioner start to move on to the next question. But if you feel comfortable dealing with multiple questions, consider jotting down a keyword or two to remind you of the questions raised, so that you can stay the focus of each question to remind the audience before you answer it. So you can find a help from your notes, take notes on several keywords to remind you of the questions. In this way, you will also avoid repeating, what was your second question again? What was your third question again? You may say instead, to answer your first question on the question about, finally your question concerning, like that. Because when we ask the questioner to repeat their questions again with multi-questions, that's going to be a waste of time. So you choose. You want to receive all the questions at once or one by one? Number 7, a don't understand or need more time to think question. This is going to be the last type of questions that may occur in a Q&A in our presentation. Ask for repetition, clarification, or elaboration when you are not certain if you have understood the question. For example, would you mind repeating the question so that I can be sure I understand you? So if you think that you need more time to find out the answer, that's okay to ask for clarification or the elaboration from the questioner. That will give you time to think. If you need a few moments to think about the questions and or to formulate a response, send explicit verbal signs to let your listener know. For example, that's an excellent question. Let me think about it for a few moments. Next one. If it's a question that you think you can answer, but you need more time than a few moments to flesh out your ideas, postpone it. You can always postpone. You can cover it later, just like the tips from the previous numbers. For example, you can say, that's an excellent question that I need more time to consider. Can we come back to this question later? And then you cover the next question first, and then you can go back to the question that you haven't answered because you need more time to think. Also use visual aids, for example, blackboard, whiteboard, flip chart that are available in your room of your presentation to help you answer a question when you need more time to formulate a well thought out response. And your response can be presented visually. So if you think you need more time to, not to find the answer though, but to, to construct the way you will answer it, because the answer will be long like that. So you can use whiteboard or anything available in your room to write down, maybe symbols or maybe pictures that can visually help you address the question. And that's okay too. And that can be very helpful for your audience, right? Well, ladies and gentlemen, so that's about handling challenges during presentation. There are 7 types of questions that can, threaten us in a Q&A session. I hope that those cover not all but majority of your challenges during a departmental presentation. If you're looking for a further elaboration or further references, you can take a look at this book. I took the material, of this lecture from Huang 2010 books entitled Academic Communication Skills on page 51, 55 to 58, and also 62. Well, it's a wrap then for lecture 7. Thank you so much for following every activity of this lecture 7. In the next lecture, lecture 8, we are going to see the application of the material we covered today. Thank you so much for joining this course, this lecture 7. I'm Maria Dewi Rosari. I'll see you in lecture 8.